Hey class, in this recording we are going to be focusing on the endocrine system, so let's dive into it. First we have the pineal gland, invisible body, anatomy atlas. We can find the pineal gland when we look at the nervous system, and we'll just start here with the brain. Just our base view of the nervous system, and we're going to go ahead and clean it up just a skosh. So we'll pull up the peripheral nervous system and just completely remove the peripheral nervous system. Excellent. We'll get rid of all those ligaments as well. And let's get rid of the bones as well. So here we go. Just our brain. And we'll go ahead and clean it up a little bit. So as we're looking at the brain, the pineal gland is a gland which is located within the human brain. And I'll go ahead and remove the cerebrum of the brain. And now we can see down deeper into the brain. And we can see there's 4 bumps here. These 4 bumps collectively are referred to as the corpora quadrigemina, but that's not the pineal gland. The pineal gland is the one directly above the corpora quadrigemina. So right here, this singular bump directly above the 4 larger bumps is our pineal gland. So that's the first objective. Next we have the hypothalamus. To find the hypothalamus, we're going to go ahead and look within the diencephalon of our brain. So I'll need to remove some additional structures, dissect back some additional structures. To clearly show that hypothalamus. So right here, this region is our hypothalamus. And within the hypothalamus, there are smaller sub-regions or nuclei that perform specific functions. We are not going to go into those specific nuclei. Just know that collectively this area right here is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, to give you some landmarks, is going to be right next to where the optic nerves, cranial nerve number 2, merges with the brain, right here at the optic chiasma. And then it's also going to be right next to the pituitary gland. And that pituitary gland is going to be connected to the hypothalamus. So here's the hypothalamus, here's the pituitary, both an anterior and a posterior. And then connecting them, we have a little tiny shaft called the infundibulum. So connecting the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, we have that little skinny shaft, just as a frame of reference. Now, as we're looking at the pituitary gland, we also want you to be able to recognize some digital histology, or some histology. So here is one of the hyperlinked histology slides. We have the anterior pituitary right here. I'm circling it in yellow. The anterior pituitary is the larger. It makes up about 2/3 to 3/4 of the total volume of the pituitary gland, and it's also going to be more darkly pigmented. The posterior pituitary is being circled in green. It is the smaller of the 2 halves. Oh, my computer mouse had a little bit of a spaz there. Let me clean that up for you. So being circled in green is our posterior pituitary gland. There we go. Now the reason the posterior pituitary gland is more lightly pigmented is because it's actually made of nervous system tissue, and we're going to have a lot of myelinated axons within the posterior pituitary gland. So I'm going to keep zooming in here, and we can start to see these little bundles or these little sections or segments of myelinization within the posterior pituitary gland, giving it a lighter pigmentation. And then the anterior pituitary gland is going to be more darkly pigmented. One of the reasons why it's more darkly pigmented is because it has a lot of blood. It has many blood capillaries within it, and you can see those bright red erythrocytes in addition to a lot of basophils and chromophils. Chromophil is kind of a fun name. It literally means colored cell. Not the most original name if you ask me. So let's go ahead and go back to our list. That was the pituitary. As a whole, be able to differentiate anterior and posterior. Up next we have the thyroid gland. To get to the thyroid gland, I'm going to go back to visible body. We'll go to our default systems view. And then I'll just click on the carotid and jugular view right here because it shows the thyroid really nicely. Our thyroid gland is going to wrap around the anterior and lateral margins of the larynx and will extend slightly posterior on the larynx as well. But I'm going to clean it up. Let's get rid of the bones. Let's get rid of the arteries and the veins to make this a little bit easier to look at. So here we have, and what the heck, no ligaments. There we go. So here's our, oops, I shouldn't have gotten rid of the respiratory system. There we go. Here is our thyroid gland, right around our trachea. Now, we also have some histology for the thyroid gland. As we're looking at the thyroid gland, it, to me, kind of looks like a bunch of pink marshmallows globbed together. Each one of these large pink globs represents a colloid-filled follicle. So if I ask for the name of the structure, this whole structure right here that I'm circling in green is the colloid-filled follicle. I'm putting a green X over the pink colloid that fills the thyroid gland. And then we'll need to zoom in a little bit more to show you the follicular cells. These individual pink or purple dots around the perimeter represent individual nuclei of the follicular cells of the colloid-filled follicles. So if you see this view and I ask what is the structure, I want to hear colloid-filled follicle. And if I'm asking about the individual cells and I have an arrow pointing to those purple nuclei, I want to hear follicular cell for an answer. Next we have the parathyroid gland. As we're looking at our parathyroid gland, notice, hey, it's the same website that I just went to. The difference is instead of zooming in on these pink colloid-filled follicles of the thyroid, I'm going to focus on these purple tissues of the parathyroid gland. First, to show you the parathyroid gland, I'm going to need to add them. So I just clicked endocrine here, removed all endocrine, add all endocrine. So you can see there's 4 brown dots on the posterior margins of the thyroid gland. These small dots represent the parathyroid glands. So now we have a reference point for the parathyroid. They are on the posterior of the thyroid, and there's 4 total. So as we're looking at our parathyroid histology, let's go ahead and zoom in on that parathyroid gland. Note how the cells have a purplish, kind of magenta colored cytoplasm. They have the dark purple nuclei. And as we're looking at the parathyroid gland, we want you to be able to identify oxyphil and principal cells. The principal cell is going to be the most common cell type. So it's the principal, P-A-L, not, notice I want to emphasize this. Another name for it is chief cell, the most common cell type. So as we're looking here, these are principal cells. Now to find the chief cells, we want to find an area that within the parathyroid gland that has more of a pink pigmentation. So right here, this region that has more pink pigmentation to it, this is an area of chief cells within the parathyroid gland. Unfortunately, there's multiple layers of thickness, so this view is kind of obscured. Let's go back to the lab objective sheet and use the digital histology link as opposed to histology guide. This is a great image right here. The oxyphil cells are those pink ones. The principal cells are the smaller purple ones. So that is the parathyroid gland. Let's move on to the thymus. The thymus itself within digital histology, let's go back and find that for you to give you your frame of reference. It is not shown. Oh my goodness. How can that be? There is no thymus gland. Although this view is missing also the gonads and the pancreas. So I'm kind of hesitant of this view. We're going to go back up to the system view here. and click on endocrine organs, the view that emphasizes endocrine organs. And we'll get rid of our ribs. Go ahead and clean that up. We'll just get rid of the thoracic cage entirely. There's one. The thymus gland is going to wrap around the trachea directly above where the or directly near the, or right around the heart. It's going to wrap right around the aorta. So as we're looking for our thymus, you will want to refer to, let me pull it up here, the Visible Body A&P app, Chapter 26, Section 9, to get a good view of the thymus. We also can use a thymus histology. As we look at thymus histology, we have adult thymus and juvenile thymus. So pull them both up on the screen. The juvenile thymus is on the right, the adult thymus is on the left. The reason we have both juvenile or infant thymus, an infant thymus and an adult thymus, is because, as you can see, there's a significant change over the course of the life cycle of a human. So while we're looking at this juvenile thymus, I wanted to highlight some unique morphology. Instead of having the cortex and medulla be located around the entire organ, the thymus is going to be broken up into lobes. And each lobe will have a medulla that is pinkish, and I'm circling it in green, and will also have a cortex around the outer perimeter of the lobe. And the cortex in this figure is stained purple, and I am scribbling on it with a yellow annotation. So that was the thymus. Next we have the pancreas. As we are looking at the pancreas is located directly beneath the stomach. So as we're looking for the pancreas, let's get rid of our ligaments too. Here is the pancreas, the entire pancreas. The pancreas is going to be directly inferior to the stomach and drain into the duodenum of the small intestine right there through, that's not the duodenal papilla, let me clean this up, right there through the main pancreatic duct draining into the duodenum. As we're looking at the pancreas, we want you to be able to isolate the pancreatic islets, also known as the islets of Langerhans. And this is going to be the endocrine function, not the exocrine digestive functions. So as we look at histology guide here, we can see how, on a zoomed out view of the pancreas, there are spots that are lightly pigmented. These lightly pigmented polka dots or speckles are pancreatic islets. And I'll go ahead and just zoom in on one. We can see how right here at the tip of my mouse there's a light purple region surrounded by dark purple. And if we just keep zooming in on that light purple region, you can see how there's a different morphology to the cells. The cells within this region make up a pancreatic islet. And while we're looking at these cells, not only are they lightly pigmented, but they're also going to be in a more irregular pattern. Outside, we have tight clusters of about a dozen cells, and these are larger clusters with larger cells within them. And then within the pancreatic islet, that I've circled in yellow, we have these cells that are responsible for the endocrine functions of the pancreas. Circled in red, I circled the pancreatic acini. We'll talk about those more with the digestive system in A&P2. Clear my screen. Go back to the web browser, and let's go back to our list. We also have the adrenal gland. As we look at the adrenal gland, we can find that in Visible Body. I'm going to add the reproductive and urinary systems. So here we can see now, let's get rid of digestive. I don't want any digestive. Let's get rid of that digestive. Beautiful. And you know what? I want to get rid of that nervous system too. Just get rid of it entirely. This is my kind of view right here. So here we have the kidneys, and on the superior margins of the kidneys we have these triangular glands, or these pyramidal shaped glands known as the adrenal glands. And within the adrenal glands, we have we have the cortex on the outer perimeter and the medulla within the middle. And while we're looking at the histology of the adrenal gland, we can see this banding pattern as we look at the histology. So we have two broad regions in green. I should zoom out just a skosh here. There we go. So in green, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight a section of the adrenal cortex right there. And then let's go with blue. Here in blue, I'm circling or highlighting a section of the adrenal medulla. So these are two broad regions. And within these two broad regions, the adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla, there are some sub-regions we want you to know, specifically within the adrenal cortex. So let's go ahead and zoom in on the adrenal cortex. Starting off, we have the capsule. This is not part of the subregion specifically, but it's a good frame of reference. If you see this layer of connective tissues, to me, it really resembles a stratified squamous epithelium, particularly right here where the pointer is. That is going to be our capsule. And then directly deep to that, you're going to see these clusters of cells, these kind of globs of cells making up this outermost layer. And I'm going to go ahead and band that layer right here in green. In green, I've just put a big glob around the zona glomerulosa. So if we go back to our list, let's clear the screen, go back to our list. That was the zona glomerulosa, which is the most superficial sublayer of the adrenal cortex. The next is the zona fasciculata. So as we look at the zona fasciculata, the transition or beginning point of the zona fasciculata is right here where I'm drawing the green line. Above, we have the zona glomerulosa. Below, we have the zona fasciculata. And I'll switch to blue now. The zona fasciculata has kind of strands of cells. These strands of cells tend to be grouped together, almost like the fascicles within a muscle, or the fascicles within a nerve. So if we think of a fascicle within a muscle, it's a cluster or grouping of muscle fibers or myocytes. A fascicle within a nerve is a cluster of axons within the peripheral nervous system. And within this layer, we have these long strands grouped together. We call it the zona fasciculata. Our next layer, next deepest layer, is going to be the zona reticularis. And as we look at the zona reticularis, it is going to have the cells arranged in kind of a reticular fashion or morphology, which is to say kind of spider web morphology. So we'll pull up our histology, and here we are. So I want to find something that really exemplifies that spider webby pattern for us here. The zona reticulata, or reticularis, I should say, is this dark pink band or region I'm currently highlighting. And I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in and see if I can find a good layer that really highlights the reticular nature. I'm not liking what I'm seeing right now. I mean, I know what to look for because I teach this stuff. But I want to find something that really emphasizes that for you. So we're going to go ahead and scroll through digital histology to the zona reticularis. This is what I'm talking about right here. Check this out. See how there's this kind of a web or mesh of cells? That's the zona reticularis. And this is just a textbook perfect view. I've never seen a view this good on an actual microscope slide in my student laboratory. But this view here on the website Digital Histology is just top notch. So class, that is all we have. Actually, just for the sake of clarity, say, here's the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla is going to be deep to the adrenal cortex, and is also going to be has a different pigmentation from the adrenal cortex. So as I look at this site here on the Histology Guide website, we can see, I'll go ahead and circle it in blue for us again, the adrenal medulla right there. So that's all we have for the endocrine glands and endocrine histology. If you have any questions about this endocrine system overview, please feel free to shoot me an email or send me or post on the discussion boards. And as always, class, happy studies.